Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to this very special horoscope looking at 2022. We're doing things a little bit differently here in that I have my beautiful and wonderful friend, Michael Barwick, that you are used to seeing on this channel. Now, Michael and I are going to talk about some of the big transits coming up ahead. I'm going to ask Michael also what he thinks about what each sign can expect. So he will touch on each sign as well. So let's not wait too much, because really Michael Barwick is a superstar astrologer. He's one of the very few people in the world that I consider my astrologer. He's just that good. You've seen him on my channel so many times. You certainly have seen him at Synchronicity University teaching very popular classes as well. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for being here.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you, Nadiya. We have so much fun.
I know, don't we? Now, those of you who don't know, because of course, Michael Barwick is an open book. If you follow him online, you know, but Michael literally had open heart surgery 2 months ago, has been in and out of hospital, and just got out of hospital 2 days ago. Look at him. He looks incredible, doesn't he? How are you feeling, Michael? I'm so proud of you. Let me just say that. You're such a strong cookie, tough cookie.
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm still recovering. A recovery is a lifestyle from a life-changing operation like that. But, you know, there have been a few hiccups along the way. But I've been resting the last couple of days and just, taking it easy from being just out of the hospital, and I'm working, here and there on catching up with all the things that I've been ignoring for so long, if you know what I mean.
Yes, focusing on yourself, though, is so important. So I'm glad you're getting a chance to do that. Obviously, your recovery is going well, because you are doing so well. And you know how important you are to me. I couldn't be more grateful that you are vibrant and healthy and here to look forward to another year of improving health.
I'm hopeful for 2022 on a lot of levels. I think that current circumstances can perhaps be best described as the storm before the calm. That's my hope. That we will see a brighter year ahead than we had with the intricacies of 2021. Surviving variants and mutations.
Yeah, I'm really hopeful for that as well, Michael. I think that it is promising, at least if I think back to what happened the last time Jupiter went into Pisces. Literally to the day, the CDC announced that if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And literally to the day, because Jupiter just went back into Pisces like yesterday. And it was yesterday that different countries started announcing sort of similar things. If you've had 3 shots, if you've had your full vaccination and a booster, then you're okay to go out and not wear a mask. But other places seem to be closing down, like Quebec, for example. So what do you think our journey is going to be in regards to the variants and the way in which I know a lot of people are really wanting life to feel normal again in a way that it hasn't felt in about 2 years?
Well, Pisces is a sign that we associate with feeling because it's a water sign. And Jupiter is a planet of optimism and buoyancy. Now, Jupiter, comes along, and there is this tendency in astrology to certainly for beginners to think, I've got a Jupiter transit. It's like, I'm going to win the lottery. And we soon find out that plotting what Jupiter is going to do for us is a little more tricky than that, because Jupiter may have better plans for us than winning the lottery, as lovely as that sounds to us in our very materialistic 21st century culture. But Jupiter in Pisces does represent a time of Jupiter getting out of Saturn's influence, as Saturn rules Aquarius, and going into a sign that it owns, it rules, it's at home there. And so I think collective feeling, a sigh of relief, is part of that process. Jupiter really is the big story of 2022 in a lot of ways, because the planet moves so quickly through Pisces and into Aries, and then dipsy doodles back into Pisces again, and then finally will be in Aries. So you know, while it's in Pisces, certainly there's lots to do in terms of you know, one's dreams, one's hopes, one's aspirations. But to outline too much what Jupiter is, the good that Jupiter is doing, is usually a mistake. It's better to go deeper than that and to take into account, you know, the deeper sense of buoyancy and lift in terms of one's perspective that Jupiter has to offer, in this case, on the emotional level. This is why I say that, it, you know, from the astrology of it, like, I obviously don't know that things are going to be better, but from the astrology of it, it certainly looks so, even though there are, of course, some contraindications. You know, it's part of astrology is that there's a dance all the planets are doing, and they're all in a conversation. So, you know, it's never perfect. It's never ideal, but it's certainly better than last year, for sure.
Yeah, last year, all that difficult Saturn, Uranus squaring each other kind of energy. I think that this year could be quite the relief. You mentioned Jupiter in Pisces. Well, look, let's just jump into it. That very big celestial sky taking place at the end of April, right?
Yeah.
We have got, really, it's a triple conjunction of Neptune, Venus, and Jupiter. Jupiter exactly conjunct at the exaltation point of Venus, with Venus, and under the light of a solar eclipse. And that solar eclipse isn't far from Uranus. It's sextile Mars as well. Pluto is stationed retrograde. So there's just so much going on as we get to the last days of April. How do you understand all of that energy there?
Well, I think there's certainly an urge in the collective towards greater liberation, greater freedom, greater expansion, a sigh of relief in many ways is how I'm reading Jupiter in Pisces. It's and certainly, you know, obviously I don't know what the mundane worldly events will be when Jupiter conjuncts Neptune, conjuncts Venus, but it's worthy to point out that Saturn squares the nodes at approximately the same time. So again, we have this complicated dance of, you know, the huge upswelling of collective feeling that Jupiter, Neptune, Venus represents, and a hopeful, pure vision of where things can go. If that can be manifested in the immediate situation, the immediate context, that's difficult to know, and that's for each of us to sort of find. But that mid-April point is a time to sort of use the Saturn piece of it to consolidate, to build, to anchor what it is that this upsurge of feeling, of hope, of optimism, of a vision, of a dream that we want individually and collectively to manifest.
And so the Neptune, Venus, Jupiter triple conjunction is that very hopeful energy that you're speaking about, that feeling, if you will, a collective feeling of believing that all is healed or everything's going to be okay. So how do you think that the Taurus eclipse fits into the fact that it's happening simultaneously with this triple conjunction?
Well, you see, this is the thing, you know, as you know, I got married
Oh,
in
yes.
August.
Congratulations as well. So we should make sure to
Thank
mention
you.
Michael Barwick got married to his longtime partner, and I'm so happy for you. I watched it online.
Yeah, in August, I got married, and at one point we were, you know, should we delay? Should we go ahead with the date that I'd so carefully picked? But we realized, or at least I realized, when Ivan said, could we find another date? I went, well, so a lot of activity this year in terms of, from an eclipse perspective, activates Uranus, particularly the eclipse on the 30th of April. April is a busy month, right? Like there's a lot of buzz, buzz, buzz to April in terms of just important things that are happening. We've already got the Jupiter, Neptune, Venus. Then we've also got the Saturn square the nodes. And then we've got the eclipse, just trigger Uranus. And I think Uranus, and later on, Uranus will conjunct the node. And I think that this sort of represents a kind of a highly stimulated group of people. It's sort of the image that I have for it. I think that Uranus here is the pent-up demand for freedom, for liberation, for breaking the bounds of confinement and containment will become irresistible at that point. How much Saturn is prepared to let us get away with that is to be seen, because we've already seen with Saturn Uranus that it coincided with the rise of Omicron and all the waves of Omicron that are sweeping the planet. I think it's fair to say that activating Uranus activates the collective need for liberation, freedom, and perhaps even some kind of sense of alliance or coming together in a way. This is not necessarily on one side or other of the political spectrum. It'll be all sides of this political spectrum will want to group up, will want to come together with Uranus conjunct the node.
Well, I'm really excited about that for sure. Now, the exact conjunction of Uranus and the North Node actually takes place right around July 31st. The eclipses certainly are activating the nodes, of course, as they do, but or deeply involve the nodes. But the exact conjunction of Uranus happens to the North Node July 31st. What have you garnered about that particular part of the year?
It's important to recognize with any astrological piece of information that there are many, many levels for it to play out, both collectively and individually. And I think that it's really important for us to find our group, find our way back into social life. I think that's what Uranus represents, that sort of collective, that collective sense of grouping with the node. And I think it's a large focus will be, how do we socialize with each other? How do we interact with each other, living as we probably will be with this endemic? The novel coronavirus won't be so novel anymore. Many of us will be vaccinated and boosted to deal with it. The question is how we're going to live with it. And I think that, it's a pull me, push you kind of thing. It's like on one level, we feel like I want to be to do and free and liberated. And, and there may be some restrictions that are difficult to get rid of, or there may be some remaining pieces of it to resolve. Certainly, I think it's fair to say not all parts of the world will receive or respond the same to these transits, and will be in different contexts or different situations based on their own country and their ability to get the vaccines and so forth. But I think that in general, Uranus to the node is a positive thing. Like, I think it's a good thing. I think it spells a coming together of the people, and I have great respect for the people and believe most firmly that a coming together is what's required.
That's very powerful. It's interesting that Uranus will conjunct the North Node in the sign of Taurus, which is very practical, right? It has to do with the economy as well, like what makes sense, what's going to move us forward in a very practical way, including economically. And as much as I see Uranus about the collective and gathering, I also see it as having a very strong dichotomy, like the sign of Aquarius, where at once it is about the collective, but it's also highly individual. That's part of its representation as, being eclectic or quirky. Those are some qualities that we associate with Uranus as well. So it should be interesting to see how we are encouraged to gather so that there can be empowerment that affects us individually as well as collectively, but especially in very practical ways and economical ways as well.
Yeah, I think Taurus ultimately is trying to, as best it can, ground out this live wire, which is Uranus. And to be fair, I mean, Uranus through any sign causes, causes a disruption to that sign. Like it disrupts economies. It just, I mean, in the sense of what Taurus represents. If Taurus represents, one of the things it represents is money. If we go that route with it, there's a certain amount of financial instability that Uranus and Taurus suggests, or perhaps new ways of doing money, new ways of doing finance, and certainly we're seeing some of that with cryptocurrency and these kinds of things. So there's exciting developments that are happening in terms of where the frontier is, but Taurus as a principle is, in a way, Uranus kind of perverts what it touches. It's its nature, and as it goes through, there's certainly, I think, we're called to task about what we own, what our possessions are, what our attachment to the material world. Like as a general rule, this is what we're called to attend to. Obviously, in different places in people's horoscopes, you'll get that. But I think it's really important to understand that Uranus is, in a way, has to be stepped down. Like Saturn's a good thing. Like it's a very good thing that Saturn's still around, trying to stabilize things, trying to contain things, trying to protect us, because we need protection. We need to look after ourselves. It can't be just, run around willy-nilly, or the consequences could be, depending on what the odds are. Uranus is like, a bit of a gambler, whatever the odds are, what the probability is, you're taking risks. And to some degree, we all are taking risks. We all have to calculate that risk personally in terms of coming out of Saturn Uranus last year. We're trying to figure out what's our comfort level, comfort zone in terms of people, interacting with people, and in what contexts we do that.
So Michael, on November 8th, we are going to have the last eclipse of the year, also in the sign of Taurus. Now that eclipse will exactly conjunct Uranus, but it's going to be part of a T-square. We have in opposition Venus and Mercury, and we have a square to Saturn, sort of anchoring this larger T-square. How do you interpret that eclipse that's going to be coming up November 8th of 2022?
Well, kind of maybe chaotic for people individually. I mean, my sense of eclipses, people get kind of freaked out about eclipses and have historically gotten freaked out about eclipses. And I tend to look at them as kind of supercharged supercharged new and full moons, and not necessarily more drama than trauma usually. Like there may be trauma in the world, but for most individuals, if it's anything, will be drama. And if it's drama, it'll be because there's something that it's activating. Now, in this case, it's an argument. As you know, to use your favorite metaphor about the stars and their conversations with one another, it's a dynamic configuration involving Saturn, Uranus, and Mercury and Venus. So, there's a lot of people, a lot of players in the game talking about their situation and to each other and disagreeing with one another. And as I said, Uranus is this very sort of individual, creative spirit that is transforming Taurus. And Saturn's trying to, hold apex, and Saturn is trying to, is dominant since it's in its own sign, and traditionally, and it has the upper hand. I mean, Saturn in Aquarius has been incredibly strong and incredibly limiting to all of us in terms of what we've gotten from it. So I would, it's going to be it'll be interesting, as they say. It'll be exciting. It's an exciting eclipse. I think that when there's a lot of dynamism in an eclipse chart, it can indicate events. There's no question that events can come out of that. But I think for most people, under most circumstances, it'll be sort of an urge to sort of, hey, let's get this, this is getting a little too out of control, right? On one hand, or maybe who's controlling me? Who's the people who are pulling the strings? Why am I curtailed in terms of what I can do? So that's the kind of struggle that it represents, and that's what the struggle has been with Saturn Uranus all along. And the reality is, even though we're past the square by the book, it doesn't, there's no more exact passes. That doesn't mean we're done with it. Like, we know this from individuals who have transits from the big collective planets like Uranus or Neptune or Pluto. And I think, that often the changes that they bring take time to sort out what has happened. You don't necessarily can see it immediately in terms of the transformation that it's bringing to your life. I mean, I certainly have been going through transits and have gone through, transformation, and I'm still going through transformation. And it's something we're all called to do, is to adjust, adapt, grow, and grow into more fully ourselves. And I think that that's part of what Uranus wants us to do in a very individual, unique way. And I think that Saturn is very much trying to control that. So the Saturn-Uranus square isn't over, is what that tells us. And so there may be more stuff kicking around that we're going to have to watch out for. There may be, but I think it's more, I don't think it's as critical to the year as some of the other things we've talked about, particularly with Jupiter. As Jupiter goes through Pisces, it makes aspects to all the collective planets plus the node. So it, and Pluto, Pluto will trine it this year. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to that sort of sense of collective will or collective direction or collective grouping that the eclipse isn't going to stop. It just may be a particularly traumatic time for some, but the vast minority in November. Yeah,
in
there
November.
may be around that time, there may be some things that flare up that are disturbing, but for most people, if there's anything, it'll be more of a drama type thing rather than a trauma type thing.
Okay, so let's move on. I want to be sure that we touch on the eclipses that are going to be happening in Scorpio before we move on to talk a little bit more about Jupiter in Aries. So the first eclipse in the sign of Scorpio is going to happen May 16. Now that eclipse is going to be trine Mars conjunct Neptune. It's going to sextile Pluto, but it's going to square Saturn. There's a lot going on with that Scorpio total lunar eclipse that is going to be taking place in May. How would you interpret that energy? Scorpio total lunar eclipse. Wow.
Well, I mean, I think Scorpio sort of, brings to light, and the story about Scorpio is that, it scratches the surface and finds something negative, where it's really meant to go deeper. Like there's a level of which the Scorpio energy, when it's activated, is something that inclines us to sort of look more deeply into whatever it is that's coming up, whatever it is that we're facing. So again, Saturn is kind of the spoiler saying, oh, no, you don't. Or within the confines of these parameters, or maybe, just maybe, we can take Saturn and maturely define what this is for ourselves, bring structure and order to this ourselves, to cooperate with the consolidation and the revealing of the form that is below the surface that requires attention or transformation. So it's a tough alignment of planets, but in that sense, but there's good things in there too with Mars Neptune. So there's a way, usually when there's a trine, there's a way around the most difficult part of it. And again, Mars Neptune points to what's your dream? What is your vision of you in the future? Where are you going? This is the question we all have to ask ourselves in light of, 2 years underground, emerging into the light. I think that's one of the realities. I think it's like, I don't know what your experience has been, but in Canada, it's you go out socially and you just don't know how to be, because it's like you haven't done that. You haven't been in restaurants. You haven't, it's just a whole sort of adaptation. And I think these eclipses point to, a more personal, transformative energies that coincide with opportunities for people to make changes to themselves, to make changes in terms of where they're going, to dig deeply into what their vision is, and to be able to find the motivation and energy to pursue it.
So October 24 will be the second eclipse in Scorpio at the very early degrees of Scorpio, a solar eclipse. Now that eclipse is going to conjunct Venus, but other than a quincunx to Jupiter, I don't think it's making any major aspects to other power players. I like to call them power players. I mean, other big planets. So how would you interpret that energy?
Well, it sounds like a potentially hot time for some people for sure. Like, sexy Venus in Scorpio is considered not doing so well there, but activated by the eclipse, there's a very sort of seductive energy to the air, if that's the sort of purity of the eclipse in terms of the positions that it's at. It's a time for people to again with Scorpio, to dig deeply into what their desire is, what it is that they're attracted to, what it is that they want, right? Venus is always what we are attracted to, what we want, what, those things that and maybe some of those things are kind of taboo or forbidden, which is another Scorpio thing. And such, for some people, it might be disturbing for those things to come up, but for others, it might be, as I said, it might be time to invite somebody over. It's really individual in terms of how people will work with it and how people understand Scorpio. A lot of people find Scorpio tough because it's an energy that like all the water signs has to appear much stronger than it is, much more armored than it really is, to protect itself. So there could be some turbulence with that, the martial turbulence with that, but and some interpersonal dynamics that may go astray. But I would think that if the conscious astrologer, the conscious person who knows what the stars are telling, can take advantage of whatever energy and harvest it for their own purposes to advance what it is that they do. That's why I do what I do with astrology. So perhaps I'm showing my love for the occult subject of astrology when discussing Scorpio. But I think that if you follow what you love during that eclipse, you can't really go wrong, right?
Yeah. And especially if you're really honest about what you love, you can't go wrong with that energy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Jupiter and Aries. Now, I always sort of like just before or right around the time that a planet is making a major move, like changing signs or starting a retrograde season, I like to do a special horoscope, and that'll be coming up later in the year. But I'm so curious to know your thoughts about this. What do you think that transit from mid-May to October 28th this year of Jupiter stepping into the energy of Aries and going right to, I believe, 8 degrees of Aries before stationing retrograde. How do you understand that transit that's happening for a good chunk of time in the middle of the year?
The thing about Pisces is that it's so big. It's about, if the water signs really are about intimacy, bonding, and deep feeling. So Cancer, it's with your family, and Scorpio, it's with the intimate other, in terms of your partner. Then Pisces is the universe or God, or whatever your understanding of the higher forces are, that you commune with that. And Jupiter loves that stuff. There's no question Jupiter is a religious principle, not in the sense of Jupiter wants you to go to church necessarily, but a religious principle in the sense that Jupiter wants you to find meaning in your circumstances. So we're looking at the situation before us with Jupiter and Pisces. What does this mean for us? Where are we going? What's happening? Jupiter in Aries is a totally different flavored beast. It's go, go, go. And whatever it touches in Aries is going to be excited and expanded and pushed to take action on whatever creative possibility Jupiter brings along, because that's what Jupiter does. It's a creative possibility, which you may or may not want to do anything about, depending on what it is. But Jupiter in Aries represents a more focused approach to Jupiterian expression, more about what do I need to do for my own growth, development, and expansion. So I think that again, this sense of 2022 that I have of that we will, to some extent, we will disentangle ourselves more from the circumstances in which we found ourselves. That Jupiter in Aries represents a time in which let's go, let's do this, let's jump into it, let's go forward, let's, Aries, the big thing, let's set targets and achieve them.
And so, I mean, I love the way of understanding this as really beginning again, fresh energy that I think so many people are going to be really excited about with Jupiter in Aries. Okay, Michael, well, let's talk about the Mars retrograde season that is going to be starting this year, taking us into next year as well, before I ask you to give us a little bit of insights into the individual signs. And so it is going to be September 4th that Mars goes into shadow, and it is going to be October 30th that Mars goes retrograde, not going direct until January 12th of 2023. And then March 17, leaving shadow in 2023. Now, what I find really intriguing about this energy is that throughout October and November, Mars in Gemini is basically just hanging out, squaring Neptune. Like, that's the big energy I see playing out there, is that square to Neptune, that free floating energy of confusion. How are you understanding, as you look at this larger Mars retrograde season that we are going to start at the beginning of September, how do you understand and interpret this energy?
Well, Neptune is a difficult energy for most people. It represents an area of life that is truly inaccessible, this well of collective feeling. So when you have a long-standing aspect from Mars like this, and Mars has so much to do with personal action, volition, moving forward, cutting your way through to where you need to be. These are the kinds of things that Mars is about. Retrograde squaring Neptune, maybe there's some things that you thought you had figured out that you didn't figure out, that you need to figure out. Sometimes Neptune can be kind of this big sort of, although more with Jupiter, but it can be kind of, this great inspiration, but inability to actually be able to manifest. Is like when you actually get what your dream is down to earth, it's full of flaws and blemishes that it didn't have in your imagination. So Mars Neptune could be a period in which people are working towards an ideal of some kind, right? It could be a time when people are taking action in terms of for their own connection to the cosmos, like their own spiritual discipline, their own spiritual, being a spiritual warrior, if you will, is kind of the flavor of it. And that, I always encourage clients that, in a way, it might not be under Neptune the ideal thing to take action. It might be better to dream of the actions that you want to take, or review the actions that you want to take, look at your plans, and redo the things that come up that need to be, oh, this is not quite as solid as we thought it was. So it'll be a confusing time. It'll be a, bright red Mars at Halloween, though, for sure. Because it's retrograde Mars is closer to the Earth and brighter. And usually there's some commentary in the press about Mars being brighter during the retrograde passage. I think it's fair to say that Mars retrograde is, it represents that time in terms of interpersonal relationships, where we're looking at how we assert ourselves, how we direct ourselves, how we go after the things that we want. And the square to Neptune is, well, or have you transcended what you want? Have you reached a higher place about what you want? Because maybe where Neptune wants you to be is beyond what you want.
Yes. And I think that, look, it's Mars in Gemini squaring Neptune. I think that there is just going to be a lot of misinformation out there. That is the main way in which I'm seeing this: gossip and confusion and conspiracy and things like that. And most of it is just not going to be true. It's just not going to be accurate. And more personally, I think more of us are going to have to be very mindful of our own mental health in particular. This is Mars in the sign of Gemini, after all, squaring Neptune as well. So it should be interesting to see how this energy works out for the collective, what we come to understand about ourselves along the way. Mars will station direct, sextile Jupiter and Chiron. So I'm hoping that brings clarity at the very least, because things could get very confusing.
Because Neptune in Pisces has not been, particularly, well, it's been a mixture of things, but one of the things that's been around is sort of misinformation and a lot of paranoia, sort of feelings in the collective that are projections, individual projections. I think it's really important to believe that the vast majority of us at all levels are doing the best that we can under the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So when we are dealing with something like Neptune, which is confusing, yeah, we have to find ways to trust, but we have to find a way to listen to our own inner voice, our own authentic drive to be and assert who we are, to get the most out of Mars. And it's good for writing poetry, Neptune Pisces. I mean, Neptune Pisces and Mars in Gemini. It's good for writing poetry. It's good for getting your thoughts on paper. It's good for sketching the dream that you want to build or where it is you want to go. But I'm not so sure it's going to be a time when you're going to get much done.
That's a great way to put it. It might not be a time when we get much done, individually and collectively as well. So whatever you got to do, try to do that as early in the year as possible, because once we navigate to those later days of the year, or later months really of the year, we could end up making ourselves go in circles if we expect to have very strong outcomes. At least, I like to think you had said something along the lines earlier about, how things sort of work out. And I like to think that there's a wisdom to everything and how it comes together. Of course, I do have a Sag moon, so of course I would think that. But I think that it's interesting to me, after we have these very powerful Uranian energies, right? That we end up as a collective having to experience Mars in Gemini retrograde or station retrograde, squaring Neptune. I think it's such a contrast because Uranus is such an energy of truth, right? Of like a very empirical, rational truth. But Mars in Gemini square Neptune is like almost like the opposite energy, right? It's like anything but truth.
Well, it's unfortunate that we humans tend to manifest Neptune in ways that are less than truthful. And I think that it's, and not only just in terms of who we are, not in terms of who other people are or what we're doing, but also in terms of who we are, that we don't see ourselves clearly. And Neptune is a fog. Like, it's like I don't see clearly. I saw a client fairly recently who was undergoing a Neptune transit and talked and this person was very confused because they have no idea where they're going and under Neptune. And it's like the astrologer, I'm able to say this is when it's happening, why it's happening, and when it's going to be over. But I think that on the other hand, we get the transits we need, like not just personally, but collectively as well. We needed these things. We need these interactions. We need these events. We need these planetary energies, and they represent a source for us to draw on, something that we can do something about. If we have the knowledge, we can navigate using the celestial signposts to go where it is we want to go. That's the most important thing.
Okay, Michael, before I let you go, I do want to invite you and ask you to go through the 12 signs. What are some important themes, maybe, a sentence or two or three for each sign about what they can expect this coming year. So let's start with Aries. What do you think their 2022 may be like, or what should they be on the lookout for?
Well, Aries, I think, is moving towards greater clarity. Like, I think that there's kind of a bubbling under the surface that may or may not be aware of. But coming into 2022, there will be an ability to be able to set realistic targets and pursue them.
Taurus?
Or Taurus. Taurus, of course, is having an exciting time, and I think that the exciting times will continue for Taurus, but there are a lot of, and some of it is disruptive, no question about it. But I think that there are powerful opportunities, more than powerful opportunities. You're being powerfully transformed, Taurus, and it's best to go along with it. It's best, as difficult as it is for Taurus to accept change, it's necessary at times for Taurus to change. And when Taurus changes, it's a big deal. It doesn't move like in little increments. It moves one quantum level to the next quantum level. It's up, one place to the next place. And I think that the year provides an opportunity to be able to work with those energies and move them forward.
Gemini.
Geminis, certainly it's confusing for most Geminis, or has been the last few years, in terms of where it is that they're going. They're particularly affected by the Neptune square, which although is moving into the third decanate of the sign, it's still very much a confusing time for Gemini. But I think that there will be increasing clarity of mind and a certain sense of positive attitude that will emerge from a sort of perhaps drippier pessimism that has kept Gemini contained.
Cancer.
Cancer, it's a tough road, has been a tough road. It won't be as tough. There's still, for people who are born towards the end of the sign, have a particularly difficult energy to deal with from Pluto. Pluto's having a conversation with their sun that is difficult. I've had a number of clients with that aspect who've had to face some pretty heavy things. But it's not the way for everyone, and I think it's not the way for everyone, and every Cancer can take advantage of the transformative power of it to be able to balance their lives and establish more security, which is what Cancer is most fond of.
Leos.
Leos of the world. Well, again, like their Aries brother, again, the greater clarity. Although in this case, Leo is it's more about it's more about sort of understanding it's how it fits into the bigger picture in terms of where it wants to go and what it wants to do. I think that Leo is in some ways constrained. Bill, who's still sort of being the spoiler for all the fun and stimulated by Uranus. So it like all the fixed signs, it gets tied up in the square, the diminishing Saturn-Uranus square. So there's a certain, I would say, dynamic between, let's be safe versus let's be free. The truth is, you can't be safe if you aren't free, and you can't be free if you aren't safe. And that's finding that sort of balance for Leo.
So finding that balance between safety and freedom is going to be important for the Leos out there.
Yes, yes.
And Virgo, what do you think is going to be up for them?
Well, Virgo, has the advantage of seeing itself from a Jupiterian perspective, with Jupiter sweeping through the sign, through its opposite sign of Pisces. So there's great opportunity for self-reflection that isn't nearly as difficult as the kind of self-reflection that the Leos are having to do, the hard look at themselves. It's a softer look at themselves for Virgo, but still they have to sort of contend with how well they can handle the Jupiterian energy, because it's fine when Jupiter is giving you blessings and giving you wisdom and making you a phenomenon. It's not so great when the lightning bolt is being thrown at you, because of Virgos really need to cultivate from this Jupiterian influence, with the help of Uranus and Pluto on either side, to be able to shift, transform, and be buoyant about self. It's really learning. Virgos of all the signs need buoyancy and need to build themselves up more.
Libra.
Well, Librans, for the large part are under good circumstances. Those born in the later part of the sign may find it a little bit more tricky. But Saturn, who is Libra's friend, as we know, is making nice aspects to the sign. So Libra's in a position to be able to structure things the way they want, how they want, as long as they remain disciplined and are prepared to do the work. Often Saturn rewards us with greater responsibility, right? Like that's often what Saturn gives to us. So it's important for Libra to take care not to overcommit, not to be pushed into a position where they're doing more than they should, but that they're advancing their goals and directives.
Scorpio.
Scorpios, there's exciting fireworks in Scorpio, so expect some drama. Like there's eclipses going on in your sign, but I think that and Uranus is involved because it's a fixed sign, and Saturn's involved because it's a fixed sign in Aquarius, and so yes, it's busy in Scorpio these days. Expect some tumult, some But I think that Scorpio can persevere under these circumstances as long as it's prepared to go deeper, not just scratch the surface and find something nasty and say, "Oh, I should move on," but rather look deeper and find the road to compassion for self and others.
Sagittarius.
Sagittarius. Well, Sagittarius is having a marvelous time with Jupiter in Pisces. Maybe too good a time. A little too much fun for Sagittarius. The party will only get a little bit more with Jupiter going into Aries, particularly those born in the first decanate of the sign. I think that Sagittarius will need to manage, like Gemini, the Neptunian energy of Pisces and all that's going on there. So there's a certain amount of finding perspective, finding context, finding how they connect into the greater meaning of life and where it's headed.
Capricorn.
That Capricorn is in a place where there's a continued flow to be able to revolutionize what they're doing, to be able to move in the directions that they want to move in. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Capricorn to advance and to go forward in whatever route that they would choose for themselves. And I think Capricorn just has to, keep in mind that what they're doing is, and their great management and administrative capabilities are being used for the benefit of all and not just for themselves. Because if it's just for themselves, then they'll lose themselves in the process. So it's good that there's all this stuff, but they need to be responsible about how they utilize it.
Aquarians.
Well, Aquarius, poor Aquarius. Aquarius has had a difficult time with Saturn marching through the sign, and although it certainly has been the place of great hope for us when we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of last year. I think that for Aquarians, it's important to keep to the road, keep to the grindstone, do what it is that they need to do the work that they need to do. The perversity of Saturn often is that when it comes along, the last thing we want to do is work. But it's important to recognize with the energies that are available to Aquarius that things can be consolidated in a way and solidified while Saturn's in their sign, and that's powerful energy if they're prepared to drive it.
And finally, Pisces.
Pisces is definitely going through an expansion. It's, with the conjunction happening, the Jupiter, Venus, Neptune conjunction happening in the sign, there's great optimism, great hope, and great forward momentum there in terms of pursuing the dream that is really important for them. And there's a lot of support for it from other planetary players in the game, such as Uranus and Pluto. So I think that Pisces is in a good place as long as quality time to connect to the universe. That's Neptune only works well when it's directed spiritually. Like well, not only, but it's certainly one of the best ways is by tuning into source, whatever source is for you, and finding that, operating from that place. And that's really important for Pisces generally. And that's really, really important when Neptune is transiting your sign. Given that there's a lot of enthusiasm and opportunities. Don't get too excited. It's exciting, but it also can be, Jupiter can be kind of like, it's coming. What was that? I don't know what that was. It's like it's gone. Like Jupiter is a shapeshifter and and disappears back into the ethers after fertilizing something. So there's a great dream here that's coming out of this, with ways to be able to honor that dream, pursue that dream, and connect with that dream.
Michael Barwick, thank you so much for being here. You know how much I absolutely adore you, and look at the stamina, look at the time you put in to talk to us about 2022 today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Nadiya. Anytime. You know you can get me on your channel. I adore our time together, both on screen and off, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you, perhaps in person in the new year. Certainly, there's the ESAR conference in Denver. Hopefully that's going to be an in-person thing. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to spend some quality time together and talk astrology, our favorite subject.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Michael. You'll be able to find Michael online. I will put his links in the description below. And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. And until we connect again, take care. As you know, I like to say, it'll be a great year. Enjoy. Bye.